You're listening to Planet Zero, an original science fiction story by Brian Donahue. Read by the author. Chapter 2, The Crew. The command center of the Redemption was built for efficiency and not with concern for the comfort of the command crew who would be using it. The ergonomics were perfect, but everything was hard and rigid. There was more padding on the walls than on the seats. There was a small and dimly lit hallway before entering the command center, which created a dramatic experience whenever you entered. It was as if the designers wanted to intentionally focus your attention on the importance of the space before you, and to force your senses to engage fully with the weight of decisions that only a select few were trusted with when entering. If the hallway passage was dark and foreboding, the command center was beaming with color and light from all around. The designers wanted this space to seem alive, so that the crews working in it would find a type of peace and satisfaction in their duties. The idea being that the colorful displays would keep people engaged and alert. Even though the lines in this space favored 90-degree angles, it had a kind of majestic beauty to it that appealed to most people's sense of aesthetic art and movement. Each workstation was comprised of one large square console that housed several smaller square consoles, depending on the complexity of the operations intended to be performed at that workstation. The workstations outlined the rectangular room with the workstation at center reserved for the commander. This was a feature Commander Gates himself had asked for while Redemption was being built. He insisted that the commander needed the ability to see everyone, thus the swivel action of the command chair. He also influenced the designers to include headsets at each station so that each word and command could be heard clearly all the time. Gates believed in maintaining a fun but professional atmosphere in the command center. He encouraged small talk and conversations that could include the entire command crew. When it came down to matters of course correction, engagement with other vessels, or running ship diagnostics, he insisted upon a high level of professionalism. If the crew wanted to enjoy the pleasures of interaction and the thrill of adventure, they also needed to respect the importance of their mission. The command crew was made up of 3 teams that were distinguished by simple titles: the day crew, the evening crew, and the night crew. Gates was the only true commander on board the Redemption, but each crew needed a person in charge while he was absent. These positions were filled by lieutenant commanders who were empowered to work on his behalf within the parameters he laid out at the beginning of their journey. Gates would rotate through each shift as regularly as he could on each mission. He wanted each crew to learn his style and the way he spoke. Tone means everything inside a command center, and he worked hard to develop crews that became effective communicators who could measure their tone even in stressful situations. He trusted everyone on board to perform at expectation if there was ever an emergency. The ship was automated in most of its functions, but required continuous monitoring. If an emergency situation presented itself, the crew would take over. They had to be ready to respond at any moment. Periodic drills were run to ensure adequate reaction times and sharpness of mind. Sometimes the crew would even ask for a drill just to break up the monotony. Because so much was automated, and time between course corrections could mean days passing without the need for human intervention, the crew actually enjoyed the drills. As Commander Gates entered the command center from the hallway, he heard the voice of Lieutenant Commander Fox alert the crew to their commander's entrance. Gates addressed the crew immediately. "Listen up, everyone. We've been parked by this beautiful planet long enough that if they have orbital detection capabilities, we have surely been seen. It is yet to be determined if they do have such technological abilities. Stay on your toe, keep your eyes peeled for any irregularities in your sensor readouts. Make sure to communicate anything and everything that might seem, weird." The crew chuckled at their commander's wit. It was a big deal to be aboard the Redemption for this mission, and they all knew it. Was this planet the source of the signals they received during their last exploratory mission? If so, were they on the brink of being a part of Earth's very first contact with another planetary civilization? Everyone was excited, especially a brilliant and talented youngster fresh out of command school, Ensign Frank Wright. Wright was 25 years old, but looked more like an 18-year-old, which he hated. He was green and a bit cocky, but that was a trait most pilots had naturally, as if it were a qualification for the job. Frank, however, had an uncanny ability to turn it off when it came to following orders, learning new things, and even when receiving an occasional correction because of his lack of experience. He was eager to learn and to grow, which was one of the reasons Gates had approved his posting aboard the Redemption. Also, he had quickly made a name for himself as one of the best and brightest pilots in the fleet, small as it was. He had terrific instincts and super-fast reflexes. The crew referred to him as the Kid, and this only served to make him want to perform well all the more. Wright was an easy 6 feet tall and had light red hair that sometimes passed for blonde. He was thin, but had well-defined muscles that could convince any young lady to dance with him if he asked. Wright was seated at the front of the command center next to the other forward-facing work console. This console was reserved for the weapons officer. Gates had pushed against putting the weapons operations officer at the front, but was overruled by those with greater authority and influence, who were more military-minded than they were with matters of exploration. They believed the weapons officer should be able to see out the front window. The weapons officer on duty now was Stephen Moore. Moore was the only command crew member that had flown with Gates on all 3 of Redemption's previous missions. An average-sized man, about 5 feet 6 inches tall in height, and a slightly husky build, Moore was tough as nails when it came time to shoot stuff, but sensitive enough to cry at classic films such as Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. In fact, old films were a hobby for Moore, and he was frequently asking trivia questions and quoting old films at random on his shifts. Most of the crew loved him and found him an entertaining crewmate to work with. He loved helping others with their tasks when his own work was completed. He was also the only crew member on board with a receding hairline. What hair he had left was just above his ears and wrapped low around the back of his head. It was all solid white, and his beard, impressively full, gave him an elder statesman vibe that the younger crew members found comforting. Commander Gates had asked him on their second mission together why he hadn't taken advantage of the new scalp treatments available to him. Male pattern baldness had all but been eliminated on Earth in recent years. Moore just shook his head and quoted the ancient movie star John Wayne when he said, "That'll be the day." Directly behind the pilot and weapons consoles sat the 2 sensor workstations. The designers had placed powerful sensor beacons on each side of the ship capable of scanning in all directions. It was determined, based off the near-tragic ending of Redemption's first mission, where the sensor officer almost missed the approach of an asteroid hurling at them, that 2 sensor beacons were necessary. It almost collided right into them, as that now retired and traumatized officer focused too heavily on a diagnostic procedure. With 2 sensor beacons and 2 sensor officers operating in conjunction with each other, it made it less likely that such an incident would happen again. Never mind diminishing the likelihood of another spacefaring vessel being able to sneak up on them. Both of these officers were currently working as a team with Chief Science Officer J.T. Brooks, who had the privilege of working 2 stations across from each other and next in line. One station was designed for data retrieval and real-time analysis. The other station was designed for more long-term research and development projects that could be coordinated with the science deck. Any data that came in passed through these workstations. The sensor workstations were designed to help with navigation and exploration primarily. In moments like this, however, they worked in unison with the science station. The sensor officers were designated as Sensor 1 and Sensor 2. They served in a dualistic manner and were both the same rank of lieutenant. Sensor Officer 1 was a middle-aged woman from Melbourne, Australia. Her accent was very much noticeable, but she worked hard to not allow it to be exaggerated, as some in the crew found her a bit hard to understand from time to time. She was a tall woman with blonde hair that curled just a bit. She always wore at least a portion of her long, flowing hair tied back to keep it off her face. Her name was Danielle Johnson. This energetic and adventurous officer sparkled with a childlike delight when she discovered something new from her sensor readings. She had a deep fascination with science and longed to discover something significant through her work. Sensor Officer 2, James Miller, was a much quieter type with an incredible and prolifically dry sense of humor. He could pull a one-liner out of nowhere, but had a keen sense of wisdom in reading the mood of a room in any given situation. Miller was fascinated with racing and, in particular, the still-going tradition of the Indianapolis 500 race. He was from Indiana and loved all things Indiana. In fact, he could often be overheard talking about the latest sports accomplishments of whatever team from Indiana was doing well. Next in line, to the right of Commander Gates, was the engineering workstation. Chief Engineer Albert Fox, a lieutenant commander, was sitting at the workstation, moving his hand furiously over the controls. He loved to solve problems and was in the middle of 3 minor crises. They weren't so serious as to be reasons for immediate concern, or significant enough to alter anything the commander and the rest of the day crew were working on concerning the planet below. In fact, most engineers would have pushed these tasks off a few hours, but not Fox. He preferred to tackle jobs as they came to him. He could certainly prioritize when needed, but he felt the ship needed to be in top working condition if the commander should need some odd function of the ship at a moment's notice. Fox was in his late 30s, dark-skinned and clean-shaven. He was a handsome man with a strong jawline and jet black hair. He was athletically built and owned all the track and field records at his hometown high school in Ogden, Utah. Fox was somewhat of a living legend there for his athletic talent. He could have been the star on any sports team, but chose track and field for its variety. That's also why he chose to go into engineering. He loved the endless possibilities his field could lead into, and he was thrilled when it first looked like one of those possibilities might take him into space. Commander Gates looked to his left and saw his communications officer, Cheryl Atkinson. She had her eyes fixed upon her own workstation and would occasionally press her headset closer to her ear as if monitoring something unique. Atkinson was of Jamaican descent and often wore the native colors of her nation's flag in her hair as ties to hold back her beautiful black and very long hair that was tightly braided in the traditional style of her culture. Her parents had migrated to Jamaica as a result of their hardships in the Sudanese conflict of 2041. Many people were forced to flee as extremists ravaged villages and towns for well over a year before the rest of the world intervened. Her family were relocated into Jamaica, a nation that had overcome homelessness and hunger. Jamaica was now a true paradise, boasting more visitors each year than the entire eastern and western coasts of the upper United States. Half the island was a tropical paradise, terrific for vacationing, and the other half had been built into a clean energy superpower over the last 20 years. It was the first nation to achieve total independence from oil and gas. When it accomplished this historic feat, it asked to become an official part of the United States, feeling that it would need the military protection. Cheryl, having lived most of her life in Jamaica, had adopted its people, its culture, and even its tongue as her own. She grew up in their schools, and so her language had adapted quickly as a child. She was a brilliant linguist and could learn foreign languages quickly. Commander Gates was hopeful that her skill would come in handy if they were to meet an alien species. Just then, Redemption was rocked by some kind of pulse from the planet. At least that was the assumption from Commander Gates. He knew better than to guess out loud and simply ordered the crew to high alert. He barked an order. "Stay calm, everyone. Let's find out what that was and where it came from. Go to work quickly, but stay steady." He turned his chair towards the Sensor 1 and 2 stations. "Anything on initial scans?" Both officers shook their heads and offered a simple, "No, sir." Gates gripped the arms of his chair, gazed intently through the front window of the command center, and added, "Let's find out what just rocked our boat." Hey, this is Brian Donahue, author and narrator of Planet Zero, an original science fiction story. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. If you really like this podcast, please do me the honor of writing a review. This podcast is a part of the Trek Geeks Podcast Network. Stay tuned, because the adventure is just beginning.